Do we have too much government?
We need to put people ahead of corporate profits.
This system is so lopsided.
This threat is a real threat to democracy.
And I think that's really important. That's something we haven't been doing in this country for a long time.
Where do you start? What do you do? How do you do it?
Access to Democracy is sponsored by Thomson Reuters, providing legal professionals with the intelligence, technology, and human expertise they need to find trusted answers. Products include Westlaw, Practical Law, and Firm Central legal practice management software for small law firms. Thomson Reuters, the answer company. Online at thomsonreuters.com. Access to Democracy is made possible in part by a donation from Firefly Credit Union. Firefly is the new name of U.S. Federal Credit Union, which has proudly served the financial needs of the Greater Twin Cities community since 1925. At Firefly, we guide our members forward and give them the power to chase dreams by delivering the financial solutions they need to get ahead. From checking accounts to mortgages, we'll light the way. We are Firefly Credit Union, and this is Life Illuminated. And Dr. Charles Crutchfield of award-winning Crutchfield Dermatology in Eagan, acknowledged as one of the nation's best physicians. A Minnesota native who trained at the Mayo Clinic, Dr. Crutchfield personally treats all patients and states that experience counts and quality matters. Crutchfield Dermatology. Look good, feel great, with beautiful skin.
Welcome. Access to Democracy returns after a little hiatus there. Alan Miller here, and we have a first-time guest, a very interesting guest, Melvin Carter, who is running for the mayor of St. Paul. And Melvin, welcome to Access to Democracy.
Thank you. I'm pleased to be here, and thanks for the invitation.
First time, and maybe many times when you're serving as mayor.
I hope so.
Give us a little background.
Sure. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I really appreciate what you've been doing here for 18 years. I'm a lifelong resident of St. Paul, born and raised in a family that's been there for 4 generations. My great-grandparents came to St. Paul 100 years ago from Paris, Texas, which at the time was known for being one of the most violently, viciously racist towns in Texas.
It certainly had a reputation worldwide,
yes.
Not just national. Right?
That's true. That's right. So my great-grandparents heard there was some opportunity here in St. Paul, and they came here with their children and the clothes on their back. They had a 3rd child when they got to St. Paul and named him Melvin. That was my grandfather. So our family's been here for 4 generations. My grandfather was a custodian in our public schools. My grandmother was a community activist. My parents have been a police officer and a teacher and a community leader in our community for a long time. And here I am, a child who grew up in our schools and rec centers and our libraries, and just am looking forward to continuing to serve our city.
And a child who made a name on his own just as well. Now, you are currently the executive director of the Minnesota Children's Cabinet.
Yes, I've spent the last 4 years working with the governor as executive director of the Minnesota Children's Cabinet, advising Governor Dayton on early childhood initiatives, also on community policing, which is another passion of mine. Before that, I was, up until 2013, I was vice president of the St. Paul City Council. I served on the council for about 6 years.
I was just going to mention that. So you were not only active as a council member, you now have been active on a state level, and it would appear that the governor is very pleased with what you did because he has endorsed your candidacy, as has the lieutenant governor.
Yes.
So always good to have that. Now you have a lot of other endorsements also, so let's talk about some of them.
We do. I appreciate that. I've worked with the governor for quite a long time now, and go pretty far back with them, and have seen him work as an incredible administrator for this state. And I've learned a whole lot about executive government, from the governor and lieutenant governor, and I really appreciate their support. I'm excited to have the support of our Public Employees Union, AFSCME, who has been right on the ground with us, knocking on doors and talking to folks. I'm excited to have the support of our St. Paul Federation of Teachers, who have a whole lot at stake right now as they work with us in a city to make sure that we're educating all of our students. And we've just got a city full of activists and volunteers and organizers who have been hard at work knocking on doors and making phone calls and talking to their neighbors
And
about
that is the way to do it.
That is the way to do it.
Especially after a difficult 2016 for Democrats. And we should mention that you are running for the Democratic nomination. You have a lot of opposition, but that will work its way out between now and the primary.
So there is no primary because we've got ranked voting in St. Paul. So we did seek the Democratic nomination that would have happened at the DFL convention this past summer. We were able to win every single ward, which we were excited about. We ended up with 55% of the vote of the delegates in the room.
And they wouldn't throw in the towel and give you the other 5%.
That's true.
That's sort of old-time politics and not really good-time politics.
Well, you know, I tell you what, we're happy with the showing that we had. We had, you know, more support than all the other candidates combined. We won every single ward, and we came out of there with a group of supporters and volunteers that were really fired up and ready to go for the summer.
And you got the hard job now. You have a year to go, but today is a special day in St. Paul.
Yes.
Because voting starts today.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes. We're 45 days away from Election Day, but early voting starts today. So today is the first day that folks can go right down to the Ramsey County elections and cast their vote in person. So we're excited about that. We've already heard from a number of folks who have said they're planning on doing that very soon. And so we're excited about getting started.
Well, the secret, of course, is motivating people, getting them interested, and then getting them to the polls.
That's right.
The Democrats learned painfully in 2016 that didn't work for them, or maybe the Democrats didn't work hard enough for it. But certainly, it sounds like you're well on the way. Now, tell me about investing in people, places, and partnerships.
Yeah, you know, one of the key premises of our campaign, we started early just connecting with folks. So we've been working for almost 2 years now, just connecting with folks in every corner of the city. We had events that we called Imagine St. Paul, and we just invited people to come in with us and imagine the amazing city that we can and should be. We heard all over the city people say, we have more to offer this city, and that we have a whole wealth of opportunities and potential in this city that we haven't really gotten right. One of the things that really came out in those conversations is the fact that a lot of times when we do government in St. Paul and across the country, when we do government, we think about things, we think about stuff, we think about building roads and building buildings and building buildings and building bridges, and we have to really think about helping people and connecting with people directly. When I was on the city council, we created the St. Paul Promise neighborhood, which is an education initiative. And it was because people were saying we need to focus on our schools and our children have to have access to a high quality education. And that's true.
And I know education has been something that you have been very definite about.
Yes, yes. What struck me as amazing was when we started bringing City Hall into education, people would say, that's not our job, that's not the role of City Hall. And what I learned from that is that oftentimes we define the role of government more based on what we're used to government having done in the past years than what people are saying they need right now from us. And so that's what investing in people means, is we've got to really focus, and we do have to maintain our roads. We are going to build some buildings. We are going to maintain our bridges and our infrastructure. We have to do it all with a focus on how we do it as a vehicle to lift and invest in people.
Well, St. Paul has had really a rebirth in the last decade.
Yes.
Certainly, I'm familiar with the St. Paul. We go to theater in St. Paul. There are a lot of great restaurants in St. Paul. Park Square's, you know, been home for my wife and I for 15 years. But there were a lot of empty spaces. Comes the XL Center, really, which was one big step forward, and the Wild. And now the Wild are taking the old Macy's building and turning it into a practice and really facility beyond just a wild practice. One of our sponsors at the end of the show is Jaime's Haberdashery, and
A great St. Paul business.
Anthony has just done wonders in starting from just being a leather craftsman into creating a wonderful, wonderful haberdashery and establishment. And you know, we see that it's taking off. There's been a big change. So I guess what you really focused on is moving that even forward further.
That's exactly right. We're a city with a lot of wind in our sails. We're a city with momentum, and we're a city that's frankly facing a lot of growing pains as thousands more people want to be in St. Paul. They want to move into St. Paul. They want to put their business in St. Paul, and they even want to come to St. Paul on a Friday night more than we're used to any time in my lifetime. That's exciting for us, and it means there's a whole lot of opportunity in front of us. We also know that that exists in stark contrast to the neighborhoods and the whole communities in which people are really struggling to get ahead. And our vision for St. Paul says we just can't be the city that we have to be, the city that we ought to be, the best city that we can be if half of our city is struggling to get ahead. And so that's why bringing everybody into City Hall and into everybody in our vision for prosperity.
Such a visionary concept. Because you have down by the river all these new condos,
Yes.
and certainly there is, I guess, I'm not sure the name of the road, where you have some wonderful houses, homes that have been there for years, but there is a problem, and I forgot to mention the Saints, but that's another real plus for St. Paul and their stadium, but it's the people who are forgotten who have to be remembered, who have to be brought in and made a part of all this. So I guess that's what you say when you're focusing on people. That's what you have in mind.
That's quite a bit what we have in mind. You know, in St. Paul, right now, 2 children who are born today, we could predict their life outcomes with embarrassing accuracy, based more on their race, their zip code, and whether their parents had the chance to go to college or not, based more on that than how smart the child is or how hard that child works. That's something that is embarrassing. It's something that's unacceptable for us, and something I'm just not prepared to continue to live with.
Let's talk about community policing, because I know that's very important to you, and get your concept of it, because I think throughout the country we've got to change our attitude about policing, both the attitude of people toward the police and the attitude of police toward the people, especially minorities, especially people who really need to be able to rely on the police to do their job.
Yeah. What we need is safe communities. And I think our vision for safe communities has to be a whole lot deeper than just policing. It has to start with good jobs. It has to start with schools that get all of our children on a path to success. And it also has to include officers who understand our community, who have great relationships based on mutual trust and respect with the people who they serve. The term community policing is actually duplicative. That is what policing is. Policing is designed to be in, of, by, based in, and with community at all times. And that's something that across the country I think we've gotten a little bit away from. And so I am proposing a pretty specific set of things to get us back to that core value of why we want officers who are civilians, who are part of our community, who work with us instead of against us in the first place.
And people have to trust the police, and the police also have to trust the people.
That's exactly right. And that trust is our most valuable public safety asset.
It definitely is. Because when you have people, and we're certainly going through it nationwide now, where we have dreamers and immigrants who are afraid to call on the police for fear that they will be picked up and deported, unbelievably deplorable in my mind. You can't really have a relationship that you need to grow.
That's right. We have dreamers, we have immigrants, we have people of color, we have young people, we have whole segments of our community who are concerned about what might happen if they call the police. And that's a big problem for them, but I think one of the things that we miss a lot is that that's a big problem for all of us.
Absolutely.
Not just for those folks, because we need to all know that we as a community can work with our first responders, our police officers, our firefighters, our medics, to make sure that we're all staying safe. That's a big problem for all of us.
Do you see St. Paul as a sanctuary city?
St. Paul has to be a sanctuary city, and of course we're talking about federal immigration policies.
Right.
Our St. Paul police officers cannot be asked to enforce federal immigration law. That
Nor
is not
should
their
they
job.
be asked to do
Absolutely
that.
not. That's not their job.
And how about minimum wage?
I'm a big fan and advocate of raising the minimum wage in St. Paul. We're advocating raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour without a tip penalty. The reason that's so important is because we have families in our community who work full-time, who work overtime jobs, and still just struggle to just get ahead. And it's critical to us to be the type of place where if you work hard, that's the American dream. If you work hard, you can get ahead. And it's just not okay with me to have people who are working full-time jobs and can't afford to put food on the table. So we are advocating to increase our minimum wage. I've worked for tips before, and I'm not a fan of a tip penalty because, you know, those tips are very variable, and we don't want to, you know, if we're passionate about families having the predictability.
$15 an hour if you're working a 40-hour week, you still are not making enough
That's
to
right.
really have a decent living in terms of paying rent and food and taxes, and there's no question about it.
That's right. That's exactly right. And you're still struggling, which is why we have to connect that with our investments in affordable housing to make sure that we have life cycle affordable housing options for people of all ages and people of all incomes in our city. That's critical. Making sure that we're not just raising the minimum wage, but bringing jobs and adding jobs in our city so that people can find opportunity. And this is all one of the reasons our campaign has been, and the vision that we've built for the city has been so proactive about economic development and how we create jobs and just create more opportunity in St. Paul for everyone.
You know, I feel in you the sincerity that's kind of coming out your pores. And it's really not just campaign rhetoric. It goes to fundamental belief. And it's very impressive, I have to say.
I appreciate you saying that. You know, I bring to this campaign a set of professional experiences that I think uniquely prepare me for the office, but maybe even more so, a set of life experiences. You know, our family was one of those families we talk about in St. Paul that lived in the old Rondo community and that got uprooted when we built the I-94 freeway there. You know, when we talk about police community relations, I'm both the son of a 28-year retired St. Paul police officer and somebody who knows what it feels like to get pulled over for driving while black. As we talk about education, I'm a product of our city's public schools, and I'm raising my children in the St. Paul public schools as well. So we've got a vision that's very forward focused, that's based on making sure that we're building not just the city that our grandparents and great-grandparents can be proud of, but the city that we know our children and our grandchildren will be excited to call home.
Well, I'm a product of a public education, and I am a firm believer in it. Not to say that some specialized schools or charter schools aren't valuable, but I think the bedrock is public education and good, solid public education, teachers who are conscientious and really go at it. And I'm really happy that you have the teacher's endorsement as a member of Education Minnesota myself and somebody who taught for many years. You also have in St. Paul some great health facilities, hospitals.
We do.
Nationally known. So let's talk to that for a minute.
Well, can I respond to what you said about education first? Because that's a critical goal for our city right now. We know that we have to do a better job making sure that all of our children in all of our communities and neighborhoods are on track toward a bright future through a high quality education. And one of the reasons we're working so closely with our teachers union, one of the reasons we're working so closely with the majority of the St. Paul School Board that's already endorsed our campaign is because that's a critical city goal. No matter how great our city services are, when people decide where they want to move their family or where they want to plant their business, one of the first things they look for is the quality of the schools and the perception of the schools in that area. So we have to work on our schools, and we have to make sure that we're surrounding our schools and our students with the support and resources that they need to be effective. And so that'll be a priority,
And
a key priority.
preschool has been proven to be so valuable to get kids ready to enter school.
That's right. That's
And,
right.
I know that's another of your priorities.
That's definitely another of my priorities. Working with the governor to implement full day K across the state and to advocate for full day pre-K across the state has been critical. But it can't even start at 4. We have to build communities that know from birth and even prenatally that we're surrounding and taking care of our families and our children from the youngest age, because that's how we get them off to the best start possible.
Of course, another big thing that's happened in St. Paul in the last few years is the Green Line.
Yes.
And how that makes travel and transportation so much easier for people. It goes right into Minneapolis, should have been there years ago. And it's a moneymaker also, which many years ago I had Tim Pawlenty sitting here when he was in the legislature before he was governor, and we argued about the Blue Line, and he was against what he said was just going to be a boondoggle and it would never make money. And I said, no, it's going to really burgeon and it's really going to help. And of course, that has proven to be true, and yet when they cut the ribbon, he was there. I wasn't even invited.
You know, getting the Green Line done,
hurt a guy.
Getting the Green Line done right was one of the things that called me in the first place off the couch to run for city council when I first ran for city council 10 years ago. That's an important project for St. Paul, and to me in so many ways. You're right, that project has stimulated millions of dollars of development and job creation along University Avenue in an important way for St. Paul. We almost built that line in a way that didn't even stop in some of the most transit dependent neighborhoods along that corridor, and I and many other folks in our community fought for 5 years to make sure that when it was built, it stopped in our neighborhood. And it did, which is important because it goes close enough to my house to shake my bed at night. And so it was important that that line serve those communities who are most transit dependent, who most need it. And that's because when we build transit, we're connecting people who live here with a whole region full of opportunity. And when we do that, we have to be careful to make sure that we do it that we connect the folks who need it the most.
And we have to make sure also that we have good rapid transit in terms of buses.
We do. We do. So building out that network is a priority of mine as well. Through transit, we can be more environmentally sustainable. We can reduce the cost of living in our city. We can do and we can encourage economic development as well. So we've built the Green Line. That's been transformational for
They're
university.
talking about expanding the Green Line now to some degree.
Yep.
Which would even be another great improvement.
I think it would be, and especially as we think about the opportunities we have right now to connect downtown St. Paul to the whole region through transit, to the airport, to Woodbury, to Forest Lake, and even high-speed rail to Chicago through this vision for our Union Depot, which is to be this bustling multimodal transit hub that I think can help take St. Paul and really make it the center of our economic region.
When I was first in Minneapolis years ago, my parents had moved here. I was in college, and I got on a streetcar to go to it. The mistake was they let the streetcars go, and it took really 2-3 decades to realize what a terrible mistake it was and start implementing local transit, and both buses and also trains, and what a difference it has made.
Yeah.
Now, I know another priority of yours has to do with mental health and the treatment of mental health. So why don't we, while we still have time, get into that?
Absolutely. That's very critical, and that
Decriminalizing mental health,
right.
Addiction, treatment of addiction.
That's right.
Opioid.
Mental health is in many ways just impacting our city, our public health outcomes, our public safety outcomes, and impacting our city across the board in a whole lot of ways. It's something that's preventable is one of the biggest challenges about it. we know that we're in a state where we're proud of Paul Wellstone's work to fight for mental health parity, to make sure that people with mental health concerns could have access to coverage through their doctor, through their health insurance policy. As we connect people with mental health issues, we know that there are students in our schools, there are people in our community who our police officers come into contact with, there are people in our affordable and supportive housing communities that need to be able to access resources. That's one of the things that the St. Paul Promise neighborhood that we created was about, is just making it easier for people who need help to connect with the help that they need. And so when we streamline the way people connect with help, when we work together to coordinate all of those different folks who are providing supportive resources, we're doing so in a way that make it easier to connect people to help and help people kind of just get right back on track toward living that promising, successful life that we all hope for our neighbors and our children.
We certainly do. Now, 2016 for Democrats was just a disastrous year. People sat on their hands. People didn't vote. 100 million people didn't vote. What are you doing to get them out in this election for St. Paul mayor? And how are you going about it?
We started early. We put staff on the ground. We started early with organizers in every neighborhood in the city to really connect people directly. And what I think we've done differently than any of these other mayoral campaigns this year is we've engaged people in a two-way conversation. So our first question was, what is your vision for the city? How do you see this? And as we talk to folks, a lot of the things that we're talking about really bubbled to the core. We want a city where all of our children can have access to a top quality education. We want a city where we have access to the type of transit options and bike lanes and just ways to get around our city. We want a city where we know that we can trust our officers and that we've got those relationships of trust and respect. And we absolutely want a city where somebody who works full time can afford just the basics of life. And so a lot of the things that we're talking about has come from St. Paul voters and St. Paul residents. And so as we say, come on out and vote as we go through these last 45 days, we're asking folks who have been investors in this campaign to come and help see it across the finish line. I think it's about a whole lot more than what you do in those last 2 weeks. It's about how you start and what the character is that drives the whole campaign. So we're looking forward to all those things paying off.
People have to vote.
They
have to have the urge to get out there.
They do.
They have to have the passion to knock on their neighbor's door and get the neighbor out there. I mean, it's all personal communication.
That's right.
Especially in an area that's as small as the city.
That's right.
So
that's right.
I don't know why I keep losing my notes here, but
no, but you're absolutely right. Maybe that was the exclamation point on the point you were just making. So we've built a great volunteer operation. We've got a team of organizers that's second to none. We've got literally hundreds of people across the city who have
so
come
you have
with
about
us to knock on the
45
door.
seconds. Give a message to your followers that they can see.
Well, I appreciate it. I'm Melvin Carter, and I'm running for mayor of St. Paul. I think we deserve a mayor who can walk in all of our neighborhoods. We deserve a mayor who has both the professional and life experiences to be able to move our city forward. And we definitely deserve a mayor who has a bold vision for the future of our city and the future that includes all of us and builds a city from City Hall to every single neighborhood that works well for all of us. I'm running for mayor and asking to be your first choice on November 7th. Or on your early vote if you vote early.
A pleasure, and save a space for me at your inauguration.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. The pleasure is mine. Thank you.
Thank you.